This is Beyond a Reasonable Doubt with your hosts, Mark Garrigus and Gary Smith.
Well, welcome, Gary. How are you on this beautiful Sunday morning in California?
I am wonderful. Aside from the fact that the Chiefs are probably going to beat up on my Chargers later today, I have had the pleasure of just watching an interview with Mark Garrigus and Scott Grubman that you all are going to hear in a few moments, and it's really made my morning.
Well, I'll tell you, I've been watching the proceedings down in Georgia, and he has had kind of a front row seat, so to speak, in the courtroom because his client was set to go on trial on Monday, the 23rd. As we're taping this, the 22nd, we're 2 days removed from his client basically getting a sweetheart deal to plead under the First Offender Act and no jail time and stipulation that it's not moral turpitude, which is an amazing deal. And fortunate enough to get him to spend his Sunday morning with us today. But first, let me Gary's going to show us a clip from the courtroom so you can see why it was that I thought it would be interesting to all of us to have this discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to point it out for the listeners, his client was Keneth Chesebro, who just got his deal in Georgia. And let's see some of the court proceedings that preceded this.
Your Honor, I'm not trying to oversimplify this because it is a complicated case, both factually and procedurally. However, as to the 19, Your Honor, there can't be a trial of 19 people, and it has nothing to do with the length of time. It has to do with the fact that two defendants exercised their statutory right to a speedy trial, and 17 other defendants, many of whom's lawyers are here, didn't. And that's our right to do, and that's their right to do. So, with all due respect, Your Honor, I don't even know that there's truly a reason to spend much time. Of course, I can answer any questions, but really much time talking about 19. So really, I think the question here today, to wrap up, is whether it's a trial of State versus Powell and Chesebro or two trials, one State v. Chesebro, one State v. Powell. All of the cases, and we would like an opportunity, since there will be some post-hearing briefing, to read those cases the court State cited and maybe respond to them. I looked at one. It's the one that says, where there is sufficient evidence of a common scheme or plan to commit a criminal offense, joinder is authorized. Willingham v. State. Joinder is authorized. That doesn't mean that severance is inappropriate. Those are not the same thing. Just because joinder is authorized does not mean the court shouldn't sever.
It's intriguing, and I invite anybody who is interested in this subject, or even if you're not interested in the subject, interested in the law, to take a listen. It's a great conversation.
Couldn't agree more. Let's hear from Scott.
Jewelry is having a big moment right now, and with hundreds of products popping up in your feed every day, it can be hard to find a brand you trust. Alex and Ani has been creating meaningful jewelry for over 20 years, designing pieces that connect you with all of life's important moments. With an emphasis on value, there's truly something for everyone. You might be most familiar with their signature charm bangle. This bracelet literally created the category of meaningful jewelry and had you stacking charms from your wrist to your elbow. This piece is an icon for a reason. Completely size inclusive, each bracelet is adorned with a symbol designed to tell your story and express your unique style. Beyond the bangle, you'll find stylish, affordable jewelry for every occasion, from classic pieces to bold statement looks. Don't know where to start? Alex and Ani makes it easy to unpack the trends you're after and sprinkle in your personality too. Each piece comes with a personalized message and meaning, truly making it the perfect gift. You can take comfort in knowing that you're shopping with a socially conscious brand as well. To date, Alex and Ani has donated over $60 million to nonprofits worldwide, connecting fashion and philanthropy in an easy, fun, affordable way. Visit alexandani.com right now to discover the confidence that comes with a perfectly accessorized piece of jewelry. Right now, Alex and Ani is offering our audience 20% off with code MIDAS at checkout. Again, head to alexandani.com. That's alexandani.com and use code MIDAS at checkout for 20% off your order.
Wow, it's a very special episode because we've got somebody who I have watched over the last couple of months and been so impressed with. It's hard to believe. Scott Grubman. I'm not going to hold it against him that he's an ex-AUSA, as as the old expression, some of my best friends are ex-AUSAs before they get religion and come over to the right side. And Scott has been, for those who don't know or aren't in the weeds, has been, I think, the most impressive lawyer in the Georgia prosecution, RICO prosecution. I've been watching the court proceedings. We're going to play a clip with Scott's permission. And Scott has represented, I always get his name wrong, but it's Chesebro, right? Or is it
Chesebro?
Yeah. Who, by the way, and that's why I wanted to have you on, entered a plea Friday. Jury selection was supposed to start as we're taping this tomorrow, correct?
Yes, Mark. Well, first of all, let me say thank you for having me. You may have been watching me for the last couple of months, but I've been watching you for years. And I just wanted to say on the record what I said off, which is Mark Geragos is one of my favorite lawyers. So it is really an honor. Second, as to being a former AUSA, I'm Jewish, and on Yom Kippur, I repented for that. So I think I've been forgiven for those sins. So yeah, Mark, we were, 450 or so potential jurors showed up Friday, and we pled. So they filled out their questionnaire, but then they were released. And we were supposed to start tomorrow, Monday, with jury selection. And, like so many other cases, Mark, I know throughout the years, you're geared up for trial. The lawyers are ready. It's my big moment, my Mark Geragos moment. And then the client says, oh, wait a second, I'm going to be judged by 12 strangers who really, I'm going to just be honest, do not like the main defendant in Fulton County. And unfortunately, or I think you'd probably say unfortunately, his name is now tied with that name. And so he decided to take this plea. It was first offender probation. And one of the really important... And
it was not a RICO count, which, by the way, for those who aren't in the weeds, at least what was being reported is a month ago, they offered you a RICO count. You told them, I assume, you and I haven't talked about this, I'm just from what I can glean, you told them to go pound sand.
Yeah, the RICO, not pleading to a RICO is important to my client because what pleading to a RICO would have meant, Mark, is that he was admitting that he was the architect of the fake elector plan, because that was the focus of the RICO. And I've been on MSNBC, CNN, all these things, and I'll tell you what I said to them, which is he wasn't the architect of the fake elector plan. He pled guilty to one count of conspiracy to file false documents. But
which, by the way, for those who don't understand, on a first offender, and it's funny you say he got religion once he saw the jurors. My father, who was my hero and was a hard charging prosecutor, used to say the clients always find religion when they see the whites of the jurors' eyes. They said, "This is the group that I'm going to put my life in their hands." I said, "Yes."
Those are the smart ones that find religion then, because a lot of the other ones find religion when it's too late in the penitentiary system. So,
Right.
But yeah, he pled guilty to a non-RICO, and he is able to continue to say, and he would say if he was here, that he was not the architect of the fake elector plot. And, there's a lot of news stations saying, oh, he snitched, he did this, he did that, he flipped. Of course, they want to say that because that's very sensational. Oh, my God, Donald Trump must be, shaking
he's quaking in his boots. He's going to he's going to cooperate against Trump. I had the opposite impression. I said, what in and it shows you, I guess, our kind of criminal defense DNA. But my reaction was, how, if you're so confident in your case as a prosecutor that you've offered a RICO and you want them to cooperate, why do you, on the eve of trial, which this was, this was 11:59 before midnight of the trial started. Why do you give the case away? And that's basically what it is. I assume there's also a world in which this is constructed so that he can continue to practice law.
Yes. So one of the huge provisions that we thought, although of course it's a minor provision as to the media, but is that the state agreed on the record that his felony plea was not to a crime of moral turpitude. And in the state, I won't say which state, but in the state that one of the states he's barred in, that's a major part of it. You actually saw that with Sidney Powell as well. Obviously, I didn't represent her, so I can't speak to her, although I would like to give a shout out to a good friend of mine, Brian Rafferty, who represented Sidney Powell. And he's actually, even though he also has the sin of being a former federal prosecutor, he's a great lawyer. But I think you saw both those provisions in both the plea agreements. And
Did she plead? I've seen a couple of things. Did she plead to misdemeanors or a felony?
She pled to misdemeanors.
But they made her plead to 7 of them or some, or 5? How many?
Correct. Ironically, she pled to misdemeanors. We pled to a felony and we got less probation. But I will also say, again, I can't speak for Sidney Powell, but I've heard her lawyer say it over and over in court, is they really missed the mark with her. Mark, no pun intended. I mean, the evidence that you would think existed against Sidney Powell, because she's this big name and she was out there saying, whatever she was saying, the evidence just simply wasn't there. Of course, you can't pass up a misdemeanor plea that's going to let you.
I was just going to say, and what people don't understand also, I mean, and by the way, Sydney also is an ex-AUSA, isn't she? Or at least DOJ at some point. Right?
I think, yes, something like that.
Yeah, I know. So, the immediate reaction in circles that I travel in is, oh, well, the ex-AUSA, forgive me, but there's always the knock on AUSAs that they never leave the office. So the first people in to flip were the lawyers who understood that the first ones in get the best deals. There is something to that. Because it's like the first. Another maxim by my father was the first person of the cops is the victim, in a mutual combat. But in this case, the statements, both by you and by Rafferty, have been, hey, there's nothing here in terms of, us adding to the prosecution. And you hit on exactly what I was going to say. The MSNBCs and the CNNs, I watched you with Abby Phillips and I was giggling out loud as you kept trying to explain to her, no, you don't understand. He's not going to help, right?
It was, look, I think Abby Phillips is great and she's, she is what she is. She's a major anchor on a major show and she has to condense things to very simple words for her viewers. But no, what I told her is the God's honest truth. Look, he agreed and Powell agreed. If you, the state, call us and you want us to come testify truthfully, then we will and they will. But I personally don't see how either of their testimonies would help the state. Maybe they have some theory on how it would. I don't see it. And I've made it clear, too, that if the defense, whether it's Donald Trump or one of these other defendants, also I'd like to give a shout out to a good friend of mine, Steve Sadow, who I don't know if you know, Mark, but
I don't know Steve, but I'm also he's some of his statements and the motions have just been spectacular.
Yeah, tremendous lawyer, great collection of cowboy boots, too. So if he ever comes on, ask him about that. But I made it clear, if they call us, we'll testify there, too. And personally, I kind of think it would be more likely that they would call us than the state would call us. But, who am I?
Things that's really kind of intrigued me about this, and I get into fights, even with, I've got one guy that I'm thinking of in particular who worked for me for a decade. He's now out on his own, former PD. And he and I get into fights where I tell him this Georgia prosecution to me is so defensible on so many levels. And I've made the statement that, look, there was a case that made it all the way to SCOTUS, and SCOTUS talked about this idea of the legislature and the legislature kind of trumping the idea of who gets to send the electors. Now, if that can make it all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, to where they're making a decision, where they're engaging with that theory, mind you, the theory didn't carry the day, but it made it all the way up. It was briefed, and the Supreme Court thought this had enough merit to rule on it. How can you say that somebody who's in the weeds talking about that theory has crossed the line. I don't get it. It's incomprehensible to me.
I agree. Look, one of the only things that Congress accomplished since 2021 was passing the revisions to the Electoral Count Act. And the entire purpose of those revisions was to clarify that the vice president and all this only had ministerial roles. And so you could have expected, if I was at trial, and I'm sure you'll hear this, from Steve Sadow and the rest when they go to trial, which is if Congress had to get together to clarify, it certainly wasn't clear before. And so how can you commit a crime by writing a couple of memos? And look, you'll see, Mark, I still feel very strongly about this. But what helps me sleep at night, and I think what helps Mr. Chesebro sleep at night, is all of those things, again, to where we started off, were under the RICO. And the RICO charge was dismissed. But I think it's very defensible. I don't think the state's case is very strong. But here's the problem. It's Fulton County. And I live in Fulton County. I love Fulton County. I'm not criticizing it. But if you just look at the numbers, 2020, Fulton County went, 76% to Joe Biden. And today,
by the way, can you tell the listeners who hear me preach this all the time, most cases, 90% of the cases are won or lost in jury selection.
Oh, of course.
Right? And I know that, Jerry Spence, when he was teaching, used to say after openings, and I used to argue with him and say, no, excuse me, before you get to the opening, you have to pick a jury. That's where the case is won or lost.
And that was another issue, Mark, is that, and I have no criticism of Judge McAfee. In fact, I'm very impressed with him. He's 34 years old. He was just appointed about 9 months ago. And he was. By
the way, I was going to give you another, but I was thinking, when Meadows was doing the removal, taking a look at the federal district court judge, and I don't know if you want to wade into this, and then taking a look at McAfee. If I'm defending, I don't know that I want to be over the district court. I know you get a different jury pool in some ways, but McAfee has been impressive.
Yeah, look, I like Judge Jones as well, the federal district court judge. He's been a judge for a long time, and I have nothing but respect for him. But there was several reasons we filed a speedy trial. One of them is because for various reasons, we thought it would be better to be in state court. But we weren't going to have much time, Mark, to strike this jury because in fairness, we elected to have a speedy trial, and we could talk about that in a minute. But that was scary to us because one thing that we kept hearing is that the folks in Fulton, there are folks in Fulton who would be supportive of, quote unquote, our side, meaning, of course, let's be honest, it's a political case, the Trump side.
Right.
A jury consultant told me it's obvious who they are and they'll be struck immediately. Some maybe for cause, and then the prosecution will use their peremptories for the other ones. The folks we have to be worried about aren't as obvious, and several of them will make it on the jury.
Been there, done that on these political show trials. I mean, I have compared this Trump era to, my career was kind of made in the Clinton Whitewater era, and the similarities, except ideological flip-flop, are uncanny. And I will tell you that you have to worry. Part of where I came up with the term originally stealth juror was during that days, because it was hard to tell who was with you, who wasn't with you at the fringes. You know what I mean? And that's
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, all of that is kind of, sombering when you're like, okay, you're on the eve of trial, and it's like, we really don't know who these jurors are going to be. And there are going to be a lot of prejudices that are brought in. And, Mark, I know I'm preaching in a choir, and I'm not talking about Judge McAfee. It's many, many, many judges. They come in and say, oh, yeah, I don't like Donald Trump. I don't like this. I don't like that. And then it's like, oh, but certainly if I, the judge, tell you that ask you if you can be fair and impartial, certainly you can be. And they're like, of course, Your Honor. And then they're like, well, I don't see any problem with this.
It's one of the reasons I often ask jurors, you can be fair. And then, as they say in Texas, we'll give him a fair trial, and then we'll take him out back and shoot him. So
right. It's like on, what was it? On, why can't I think of the movie now? My Cousin Vinny, sorry.
Right.
Where he's the woman's against the death penalty. And then the prosecutor says, well, what if I told you that he cowardly shot this person in the back of the head while he wasn't looking? And she said, well, I would say fry him. Your Honor, she'll do. And those are the kind of type of things that we have to deal with still to this day, to be honest with you. It's kind of crazy. And so, Mark, I don't know if you're familiar with another RICO case that's going on in Atlanta right now. It's called the YSL trial.
Right.
It's a bunch of rappers, Young Thug, very famous rappers that are on trial for RICO at the same time. Jury selection there has been going on for 10 months, and a jury still hasn't been struck because they're telling these jurors that it's going to be, 9 months, 12 months, whatever. Will you have a hardship? And they're like, of course I will. So for literally 8 months or so, they were just hearing hardships. And our trial, we needed to strike a jury, according to the court, in 10 days. And because of that.
Strange. So in Georgia, if you don't waive speedy trial, just getting the panel in and swearing them does not toll the speedy trial?
We don't know. There has never been a case, but there was a case recently, and I think it was in the double jeopardy realm, where the Georgia Supreme Court had to decide, what does it mean to start a trial? And what they said is it means you strike the actual jury, swear in the actual jury. And so the judge picked up on that and said, hey, I'm aware that this is going to be an issue. And so I'm going to make sure, come hell or high water, that we swear in that jury by, whatever. And we said, well, Your Honor, how? I mean, I know, here's what I said to the court, and it was on TV, so I can say it here. Your Honor, I know we elected speedy trial, okay? And I know that puts the court in a tricky position. I understand that. I understand, but you have to understand, Your Honor, we have the statutory right to a speedy trial, and we have the constitutional right to a fair and impartial jury. And while those things could be, at odds because of the way the legislature passed this law, what I said to him is, I said, Your Honor, I hate to sound arrogant, but I would kind of say what judges tell us all the time, which is, well, if you don't like the law, go to the legislature and ask them to change it. And he kind of smiled and then said, okay, that sounds great, but we're going to strike this jury in 10 days. And that, let's just say, was a sobering fact.
That's also interesting, because if you're going to take the position that you're going to import the double jeopardy concepts into this, then the only time that you could say that applies based on the current law is, you got Oregon v. Kennedy, which is that the only exception to where the defendant asks for the mistrial that it bars you is if it's based on prosecutorial misconduct. Here, you don't have that. Here, it's the defense who said, we want a speedy trial, but we also want our other constitutional right. And we're to the extent possible that we're not going to say what's in jeopardy if we go beyond that I don't really see where that's an issue.
Yeah, but look, I have a feeling that the Georgia Supreme Court, if they would have had to reach that issue, may have said, kind of similar to this case you're citing, well, a criminal defendant cannot exercise a right and then basically put themselves in the position where they're almost guaranteeing an acquittal as a matter of law. But here's the other thing. Most cases don't take more than a few days to strike a jury.
Correct. I've never heard a jury. The longest jury selection I've ever had was 6 months. So, I can't even, the YSL case, I can't even imagine being there for 10 months and still not having a jury. And mind you, I grew up in a place where for death penalty cases, we had what was called holy war dire, where you would take each person in individually in capital cases.
Yeah. And Mark, keep an eye on that YSL case. I know we're here to talk about another, because just speaking, again, I know I'm giving all these shout outs and that wasn't my intention to come on, but great lawyers in that case. Bruce Harvey, I don't know if you know him.
I know who Bruce
lawyer.
Is.
Brian Steele is representing Young Thug, great lawyer, and several others. So that'll be an interesting case.
Will that be televised?
It will be.
So I've got one last thing. I could talk to you for hours, and I will next time I'm in your jurisdiction. Tell me a little bit about your client, because I found it interesting that people tend to know where Sidney Powell is, and given her representation of Michael Flynn, and she, by the way, she did a very able job there. Shout out to her to that extent. But he was kind of tied at the hip. I don't know if I'm exaggerating that, with Lawrence Tribe, who was notoriously kind of considers Trump the Antichrist. And so that to me is fascinating, and would argue for this idea that he was doing his job as a lawyer, that he could go from being a Lawrence Tribe disciple to exercising his lawyerly duties and writing memos.
Yeah, look, if I would have given an opening statement, I would have said that the reason he got involved, someone asked him to write these memos on behalf of the Trump campaign, is because he was writing the same kinds of memos on behalf of the Gore campaign under Lawrence Tribe in 2000. And I really, look, there was
Can you expand on that for a second? Because that's fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, there was a CNN article. Your listeners could look at that for a little more detail, but the CNN article lays out that for many, many years, Mr. Chesebro gave a lot of money to Democratic causes. And I think he really did get involved in 2020. I know it sounds crazy because Trump, there's people have such strong feelings one way or the other about Trump, but he really did get involved as, I think, an academic exercise. He is really, and I say this, he'll listen to this, and I know he will laugh when he listens to this. He's a nerd. He is a constitutional nerd. And I think we didn't know whether he was going to testify or not. I think there was actually a chance if we went to trial, he would have. And had he testified, I think the jury would have seen, you might agree or disagree with the advice he gave. In his own words, in one of the emails, it was certainly a bold strategy, but he's just a guy who loves the 12th Amendment, loves the Constitution. Ken Chesebro, this is so interesting. Ken Chesebro was involved as counsel in the Dalbert v. Dow Chemicals.
Wow.
The expert standard case.
The gatekeeper.
He was involved, I believe, in the Flint water case somehow. I mean, he is just a law nerd, and he's brilliant. And yes, Professor Tribe took great offense that Mr. Chesebro would dare to use his scholarship in support of something that Professor Tribe doesn't like. And let me just say something about Professor Tribe in case he listens to this. Nothing but respect for the man. I won't say anything bad about it. But here's what I would say. Sometimes when you put out scholarship, it is used in ways that you might not see through when you're writing it. That doesn't make it a perversion of your scholarship. It's simply the way the law works. And so I hope Professor Tribe is able to move on from Mr. Chesebro, because he has had a ton to say in the media. I have nothing but respect for him, but he hopefully can now use his constitutional prowess to deal with other pressing issues of the time.
By the way, one of the duties that you have as a lawyer when you take the oath is that you're not going to be influenced by public negativity around your client, or worry about the reputation of your client.
Well, look at me. I mean, you've had names that are 1,000 times, million times bigger than Ken Chesebro, but look at me. I was out there, and everyone tells me don't look at Twitter, don't look at the comments, but we all do. Let's be honest. We're laying in bed at night. MAGA lawyer Scott Grubman, this, that, and the other thing. You can't see it. I'll just show you. This was,
Wow, I love it.
This is on people,
but isn't there a part of you that is frustrated, I should say, or maybe I don't want to be asking leading questions, but this whole Trump prosecutions have exposed to me, and it's kind of this ideological pretzel that I'm in. A lot of what is being said, I agree with towards the prosecution. This is not how we want to have our criminal justice system work.
Yeah, look, I have my own personal feelings about politics. You saw the sign. And, first of all, I didn't represent Donald Trump, never have, never talked to the man. Not saying his lawyer is great and I respect him immensely. So, but what I said to myself, Mark, is in 99.9% of cases, I don't know what my client's politics are. I don't care. If it's a doctor that committed healthcare fraud, well, they are probably Republican, let's be honest. But if it's a doctor that committed healthcare fraud, I don't care if you're a Republican or Democrat or who you voted for. And so in this case, yes, I know it's different and because of who Mr. Chesebro was. But you know what? I think it's no different than anyone else. There's another great lawyer in this case. One of the defendants, Ray Smith, are represented by three great lawyers, Don Samuel, Amanda Clark Palmer, and Bruce Morris. And Don teaches you may know Don Samuel, but he teaches a class at Georgia State. And the first thing he talks about is how everyone asks him, how do you defend these people? It's like,
my go-to line on that was people, how do you sleep at night when you defend somebody you know is guilty? I say, I don't lose sleep over that. I lose sleep when I know they're innocent.
Right. That is so true. That is so true. And the other thing I'll say, Mark, and is the thing that opened my eyes in this case. My eyes were starting to open. But what really opened my eyes, and this is going to really risk sounding like a right-wing talking point, but as you can see, I promise you it's not, is the way the media skews stories. Because I kind of understood it before, but then I became part of the story and I was like, wait a second, I was just in this meeting 5 minutes ago. It did not happen like that.
Well, I'll tell you, I've often said my biggest regret about Scott Peterson was not having cameras in the courtroom, because what you saw was, I thought it would damp down interest. It had the opposite effect. I had people sitting in New York who didn't know what was going on. They would read a report somewhere from somebody who didn't know what was going on, and then they would pontificate. And you would say to yourself, am I living in an alternate universe? And that's what you're experiencing. I've long made the argument that what we've had is the press used to be cheerleaders or hold accountable prosecution. Back when I was young, and I'm older than you, they used to kind of always question authority. Somehow that in criminal cases, they became cheerleaders for the prosecution. And now that's infected the political arena. And it's a horrible thing to see. And God knows, the old expression, when the Republican comes into my office and starts complaining about stuff, I'll ask them, well, how did you vote on the Victims' Bill of Rights? How did you vote on this? How did you vote on that? All those things you voted for and cheered on were the erosion of the constitutional protections.
Well, and ironically, and look, again, not personally a Trump supporter, there was criminal justice reform under the Trump administration. Now, some joke and say it's because he knew he was going to be a defendant, so he was trying to lay the groundwork for his own future, and that's fine. But there was criminal justice reform, and you're absolutely right. I think particularly, politicians need to remember that these protections are just so important. And let me just say one thing, okay? You have this Georgia RICO statute, which is stronger for the prosecution in certain ways. I won't get into it all because I'm not a huge expert on RICO. I was going to kind of learn as I go. So thankfully, I didn't have to do that. But you have this RICO statute here in Georgia that can be used really in just any way possible, as you see in this case. And the people on the left really cheered it when it was used against Trump and my guy and the 17 others. Almost immediately thereafter, and I know you're not here in Atlanta, so you might not, pay attention to the local stuff, but there was another RICO prosecution by Chris Carr, the Republican AG, about a place down here called Cop City, which is a proposed police training center in Atlanta in a forest. And there's a lot of protesters saying, you shouldn't cut down these trees to build a police training center. And so Chris Carr prosecuted under RICO, not only some of the protesters, a lot of the protesters, but also some of the lawyers and folks who were raising bail for the protesters. So then the same people who were on TV saying, this is RICO's amazing, Fonnie Willis is amazing, our hero. They're like, wait a second. How could you do that to these protesters and the lawyers? They're just lawyers. This is Mark. How ironic.
It's astonishing. And what a great way to set up what has happened here, and how you're going to get hoisted on the petard. Just wait, it always comes around. I could talk to you for hours. Mr. Grubman, thank you so much for coming on, and we will be talking again soon.
I hope so, Mark. Thank you. You truly are an inspiration, really, really to me. As I said, top 5. It's like Tupac, Biggie, Nas, Jay-Z. It's Johnny Cochran, Mark Garrigos, a couple of others. So thank you so much. It was a great honor.
Thank you so much. See you.
Have a good one. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to Reasonable Doubt. Subscribe on YouTube at youtube.com/Reasonable Doubt Podcast.